de Cape Town. El grupo de investigación del Dr. Ben-Erik van Wyk tiene varias líneas de investigación, entre las que destacan taxonomía sistemática y quimiotaxonomía de familias de plantas africanas, principalmente la Piaceae, Fabaceae y Astroladaceae, entre ellos el género Aloe y otros géneros relacionados, y plantas medicinales y etnobotánica. Incluye además etnobotánica de Kong San y Cape Dutch, control de calidad y productos de desarrollo de cultivos. Yo quisiera además incluir aquí que él ha trabajado una forma de reconocer el conocimiento etnobotánico de las comunidades, ¿no? Y esto es algo que ella ha aportado a la ciencia, ¿no? Él seguramente nos va a comentar, nos va a platicar sobre los trabajos que tiene, pero eso es algo que yo sé que lo ha hecho. Y además otro punto importante es la forma de cómo se acerca a las comunidades y cómo de forma ética, ¿no? Cómo ha desarrollado esa forma de relacionarse con las comunidades. So I'm great. It is great that we can have you here today, Ben. I'm very, very happy to hear you again in your conference. I was introducing you, saying that we know each other since long time, and we are good friends also. And you were able to come every year here, but okay, actually it was not possible because the pandemic. So please, I can let you with your public, with people is wanting to listening to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kalina.
Thank you, Ben.
Let me share my screen. And while I do so, I just want to say thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be with you today, virtually, and to share with you some ideas about the importance of ethnobiology in nature conservation, biodiversity conservation. Let me just see. Yeah, I think it worked. Is the sound okay, Kalina? You can hear me well? I think Kalina is now muted. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Ben-Erik van Wyk, as you've heard, and I am as enthusiastic about Mexico as I am about South Africa. Those are two fantastic countries, two diverse countries. They both have tremendous cultural diversity, as well as tremendous biodiversity in general and plant diversity. And it is fascinating to study these topics. So what I would like to emphasize today with this talk about ethnobotany, the importance of ethnobiology and the importance of traditional knowledge, is that without knowing the resources, without knowing the uses, without knowing about nature, we are not able to work towards a sustainable earth. We need more information and more research to document the wonderful information that we have, the information that was passed on by generations and generations before us. So let me start, and I would just like to emphasize that I've tried to translate some sentences into Spanish for those who are perhaps not so good with the English. Let me just see if I can. There we go. Yes. So conservation, in my opinion, has two components. There's the conservation of biodiversity, but then what people often forget is there's also the question of conservation of knowledge, the knowledge about nature. So it's recently we have learned that knowledge can also go extinct. And I will move into that in more detail. But why is ethnobiological knowledge important? I think it's important because we can learn a lot from traditional methods and traditional ways of, for example, harvesting. Because in my experience, people living in rural areas, in natural areas, they are conservation minded. They consider carefully what they harvest and how much they harvest, because they want to make sure that they will have something for the future. So, for example, this lady that you see on the screen, she's a San woman, a Bushman woman from the Kalahari, and I had the privilege to meet her there, and she dug up this root that she's holding. It's a thing called Cambrua. It is a Phocia species, and she took a long time to cut the top end of this root off and to replant it carefully. So she only harvested the bottom part of the root. And this is, of course, to make sure that the plant will grow again. This despite the fact that there were about 20 little children that were desperate to get hold of this root because it's their favorite delicacy. But they had to wait until this lady took great care to cut the root, to replant it carefully, and then only did they start eating. Another example I can give is the way people harvest bark traditionally. There's the traditional belief that one cannot harvest bark on the southern side of a tree. It must be on the northern side. In the southern hemisphere, that is the sunny side, the warm side of the tree. And what is more, they have certain ways of harvesting. For example, if the bark is harvested for kidney ailments, then the pieces of bark being harvested should be oblong like a kidney-shaped piece of bark. But in general, if you visit the Muti market, the traditional medicine markets, you will find that the bark is always harvested in long strips, as you can see on the photo here. And the rationale behind that is that the tree will recover. With an oblong strip, the cambium will soon regenerate and it will cover the wound. So that makes it more sustainable, because in general, bark is not really very sustainable. I think we should all think about the Convention on Biological Diversity. 168 countries signed on to this. This is the so-called Rio Convention, the Earth Summit. And the aim of this was to unite the world in trying to make it a better place and to try and make it, to try and maintain the diversity and the stability of life on Earth. And so the three main objectives were the conservation of diversity, the sustainable use of natural resources, and then the fair and equitable sharing of benefits that arise from the commercialization of indigenous plants and animals. So those were the three aims of the Earth Summit in Rio. And of course, then that ethnobotany is highly relevant in this context, because this is now the traditional resources that people use in rural areas in different parts of the world. Then some years later, we had the Nagoya Protocol, which spelled out the ways and means in which people can be compensated for the use of their natural resources. I think in this context, Mexico is particularly important because Mexico has given the world great treasures, great treasures. We owe, I think the world owes Mexico a great debt, because we have in South Africa maize as a staple food. We have, who can go without chocolate? I mean, chocolate is also a Mexican product. We have vanilla. we have beans, we have pumpkins. So the world has really to be indebted to Mexico. I think it's also one of the most underestimated cuisines in the world. The Mexican cuisine, rich and interesting. Then not all people will know this. The botanist will know, because at the last International Botanical Conference in Shenzhen in China, it was the 19th Botanical Conference in 2017. The meeting adopted the so-called Shenzhen Declaration. And the Shenzhen Declaration basically is aimed at making the world a better place. That plant scientists, what they should do to make the world a better place. And for the first time, emphasis was placed on not only nature itself, but knowledge about nature, and the realization that it is not only species that can go extinct, but it is also the knowledge about species that can go extinct. The wording I will show you here, that's the English wording, and I've typed it out to make it a little bit better to read, also in the Spanish language. So it has to do with priority 6, to value, document, and protect indigenous, traditional, and local knowledge about plants and nature. And then it goes on and says, indigenous, traditional, and local knowledge about nature is disappearing even more rapidly than is biodiversity itself. Once such knowledge is lost, with its unique insights into nature, it can never be regained. So I think that's a very important principle, and that is in the context of Southern Africa, especially important. And I will tell you later why I think so. Then there is also that we need to consider is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So many of us, when we apply for funding for our projects, we motivate it by saying how our work and our research work will impact and will contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at ethnobotany, then you can see, and traditional knowledge about nature, then you can see that it touches on many of these. The majority of the 17 developmental goals are relevant, or is relevant in terms of ethnobotany. For example, to end poverty, to end hunger, to ensure sustainability. And I will underline the word sustainable just to show the importance of biology in all of this. I think you probably have this also in the Spanish language online that you can download. It is a well-known document, this one, but it's worth considering. So why is indigenous knowledge and ethnobotanical inventories important? I think that I'm very much focused on inventories, on documenting the knowledge, because in South Africa, as in other parts of the world, we have a very much oral traditional system of knowledge transfer. So people did not write down things, they kept it in their heads. So many people are still illiterate, and it's often the illiterate people that have most of the knowledge and that have precious knowledge that came from their ancestors, and if once they die, all that knowledge run the risk of being lost. So it's important to try and record as much as possible. Now, why is Southern Africa such a special place? I mentioned it earlier. It's because of the cultural diversity and also the botanical diversity, actually biological diversity in general. But I'm a botanist. If I just look at plants, you can see there I have this summary of the diversity in Africa. We have 10,000 species in North Africa, 32,000 species in the tropical part of Africa, the blue, the pale blue, nearly 23,000 species in the southern African region, which includes Namibia, and then the little red part, the Cape area, we have 9,000 species in that Cape Floral Kingdom, the southern tip of Africa, and it has 60% endemism. So 60% of the species of the Cape occurs only in the Cape and nowhere else. And you can imagine if you have diversity, human diversity, and you have botanical diversity on a regional basis, then there are so many different permutations that the same plant can be used by one culture for one purpose and by another culture for another purpose. We also have in Southern Africa the oldest evidence of human abstract thinking in the form of 160,000-year-old heat-treated silkreed. So that's a kind of stone, kind of rock. And the people, 160,000 years ago, treated this rock in a very specific way, heating it up and cooling it down, in order to change the structure, the crystal structure, so that it makes better implements, better stone tools. And this information is clear that 160,000 years ago, in Pinnacle Point Cave, which you see on the map near Mossel Bay in the Cape, is the place where we have the oldest evidence of human abstraction. And now it stands to reason that much of the ancient information about the uses of plants and the ancient information about the uses of biology in general probably was transferred through the generations. So if we study ethnobotany in Southern Africa, we probably have an insight into knowledge that is really ancient, really ancient. And that makes it very special. I think if you look in Europe, ethnobotany in Europe, for example, then it's a few generations. It is not that old, but in Southern Africa, the information is really potentially hundreds of thousands of years of experimentation, trial and error, that people came up with these useful plants. The other point that's important is to recognize that the knowledge is not yet recorded. It's not yet systematically recorded. So, and I give you some examples from my own students and our own work. Margaret Hully, for example, she did a PhD on the Little Karoo, also known as Kanaland in South Africa, the southern part of South Africa. And she recorded a total of 3,700 species, useful species. 868 useful species, a total of 3,000. 202 medicinal plants, and then 6,384 medicinal use records, of which 4,130 were new, not recorded before. And in terms of vernacular names, she recorded 287 new vernacular names, never before recorded. In the case of Janneke Nordkeer, who studied the ethnobotany of Namaqualand, which is the northern part of the Cape, she recorded 45 new species records and many new use records, I think several thousand. And she also recorded 177 new vernacular names, including 105 of the Nama language, the click language of the Nama people. By the way, the people on the right that you see there are all of them deceased now. The original work in the Kamisberg, in the region of Namaqualand, was done in the Kamisberg, and these people were the bush doctors, so-called bush doctors, bossy doctors, who gave us the information. They are all deceased now. And if you revisit that place today, you will probably only find 10% of the knowledge that we have actually recorded in 2010. And then the Venda people are very interesting. They are quite unique in many ways, their culture. And I had this Venda student, Dr. Magwedi, who studied the ethnobotany of the Wavenda people. Now, there was a thesis done by Edward Maboko, Mr. Maboko, in 1990 about the useful plants of the Venda culture. And he recorded a total of 294 species. And now, but Katu managed to record 574 useful species. So he basically doubled the number of species that are known to be useful, even in a well-studied culture. But the most shocking result for me was a man called Lloyd Mhlongo, a Zulu man, who studied his MSc in a village where he grew up, Amandawe, near Scottburgh, near Durban. And you can see there the statistics. Now, the Zulu culture, I have to say, is very well studied. There are many books on the Zulu people, the Zulu medicinal plants. There's this inventory by Hutchings et al. That recorded all the medicinal plants of the Zulu, or what they thought were all the medicinal plants. And that book includes 1,093 species of medicinal plants. But as you can see, Lloyd recorded in that Amandawe area 110 new species records. In other words, plants that have never been previously associated with medicinal uses. That is 10%, basically more than 10% new records. Then he also recorded 1,106 new use records, medicinal uses. And surprisingly, he also recorded 560 new Zulu vernacular names. Now, if you consider that there are several books written on Zulu vernacular names, then it is really surprising to find in one village area 560 names that have not yet been recorded in the literature. So all of this points to a great need for further work, further research to find out more about nature and about the way that people use plants. Dr. Wellcome, in her study of the food plants of Southern Africa, also made some remarkable discovery. The standard reference for the food plants of Southern Africa is a book called Food from the Veld. It was published in 1983 with several reprints, and it contained 800 species of edible plants for the whole of Southern Africa, including some joining countries such as Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. Peters and his co-workers, who were based in Kew, recorded 1,714 edible species for sub-Saharan Africa. It's noteworthy that they also included plants that are used by primates, by gorillas and chimpanzees. And now if you look at the result of Dr. Wellcome's work, you will see that she has recorded 1,740 edible species for Southern Africa alone. In other words, she recorded more species for Southern Africa than Peters et al. For the whole of Africa, of sub-Saharan Africa. We are still regularly recording new edible plants that previously people didn't know was edible. Also, Lloyd Mhlongo in KwaZulu-Natal are coming up with several new, for example, new fruits that people didn't think was edible. So what we are trying to do, of course, is to inspire the younger generation and the young scientists to focus on ethnobotany and to focus on recording of traditional knowledge. And so from my office, we have over the years, since 1996, arranged 24 annual conferences of what we call the Indigenous Plant Use Forum. And this has been highly successful and very popular in inspiring young scientists to study their own cultures and to study their own cultural interactions with nature. The next one will be in in the last week of August in the Kruger National Park. So I think we want to make it a special event because it's the 25th anniversary of the, it's the 25th conference. So it's like a quarter of a century, and therefore we think it will be special to have it in a special place like Kruger National Park. And you are welcome to come to South Africa and attend this conference if you want, if you are interested in ethnobotany. So I can summarize by saying there is a need to record, analyze, and interpret precious indigenous knowledge for potential future uses in art, science, and commerce. Because there are many, many applications of nature knowledge, not only for medicine and food, but for many cultural things as well, and for designs and so on. So I can maybe just briefly share with you the measures that the South African government is taking to comply with the Rio Convention and with the Nagoya Protocol. So we have legislation in South Africa aimed at making sure that we comply with the obligations under the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this act is called the South African Biodiversity Act 10 of 2004. It was amended in 2009. And the aims, I've typed it out, but there it is, how it is written. I can just summarize it for you here. So the purpose of the legislation is firstly to organize, to make sure that the management and the conservation of biodiversity is on a high level in South Africa, to protect species and ecosystems, to ensure the sustainable use of indigenous biological resources, and also to establish the South African National Biodiversity Institute. We have a special institute that was started, that was basically formed by combining previous institutions like National Botanic Gardens and so on. So we now have an institute that focuses on biodiversity as a whole, not only plants, but also animals. So it's a permit system, and you have to apply for a permit. Luckily, as scientists working on the discovery phase of bioprospecting, in other words, we do lab studies, we come up with new discoveries, but our aim is not to commercialize. Then we do not need a permit for that. But as soon as you want to start making money out of biological resources, you have to apply for a permit. And also you have to apply for a permit if you want to export natural resources to other countries. There's also part of that process would be a material transfer agreement between the knowledge holders and the recipient or the bioprospector. And also there is necessary that you do a benefit sharing agreement. If the project is successful, to what extent will the knowledge holders benefit from the commercialization of the resource? This, of course, is an interesting topic and a sort of a political topic. I'm not very good with politics, but there were many papers published on this topic. Where the people ask questions, who do nature belong? Who is the owners of nature, and so on. I think it's an ancient question. Since Roman times, the Roman Dutch law, for example, classified air and nature as res communes, as common goods that everyone has free access to, but that you need to take action. And once you have hunted the animal, for example, then the animal becomes your property. And the government or the state just regulates under what conditions can you do the hunting. So it's an ancient question and it's quite interesting. And you can see that there's also some unexpected consequences or unintended consequences with all these rules and regulations. And I think the main problem in South Africa is that the government does not have the capacity to implement all these, because the concepts and the principles are good, but when it comes to implementation, then there's delays and so on. And that becomes frustrating for business people who want to move ahead and start to commercialize plants. But we are sorting it out slowly but surely. And now I just want to briefly share with you some ideas about how indigenous knowledge can be integrated into the knowledge system. In other words, what is the procedure? And I present to you the procedure that we follow. So I was appointed as a national professor in indigenous plant use. And so I think it's my responsibility also to provide some leadership into the way in which knowledge should be gained from people, how it should be done in an ethical way, in a correct way, not to exploit people. And let me show you just the process that we follow. And I have it here as 7 steps. We follow 7 steps. The first one is ethical approval from an ethics committee, such as a university's ethics committee, where we have to provide a very strong motivation why the study is necessary and how we will do it and so on. The next step would be to collect all available information. That's now historical information, archaeological sometimes, and the literature, to be absolutely sure that we know what has been done before for that particular area or that particular village or whatever. And then the third step is we go on a reconnaissance trip. So we try to engage people with knowledge to identify people with rich knowledge and to establish relationships with them, to become friends basically. Because in my experience, the rural intellectual people love to talk about their plants with like-minded people. And then we do a rapid ethnobotanical appraisal where we record all the species in the environment. We take photographs of every species. We collect specimens. We compile a preliminary checklist. And we also prepare a flip file. I will show you just now what the flip file looks like, because we have a very specific way of recording information, very systematically, not random as most other people do. So people talk about a forest walk, where you now go into the forest and you walk around and the local people point out that tree is used for this and that tree is used for that. But that is a shotgun approach. I don't believe in that. That's not good quality, because not everyone, no person can recollect all the useful plants of the region. And so you're sitting with incomplete information in the end. We do it much more systematically. It's much more work, but it is very rewarding. So we do a quantitative survey as a step 5, what we call the matrix method. And I'll show you quickly how it works. And then we publish the data and analyses in the form of papers or posters or theses. The posters and the theses often go back to the community in the form of feedback. So the last step is the feedback to the community. And that is a very important step, because people may feel misused if you do not come back. If you just go there, record all the information and never go back, then people feel disregarded. They don't like that. So one's got to go back and provide them with feedback, with a summary of the results of the study. It is just simply good manners, right? So we follow basically the guidelines of the International Society for Ethnobiology. They have a code of ethics that you can download from the website. There is the address given. And that is a very useful guideline. But most of it is common sense, basically common decency, but it's good to look at it in detail. On the left, you have an example of a consent form. So we ask all the participants to fill in this consent form. We do it if they are not literate. And we also have witnesses in the case of illiterate people. So we have a formal system of informed consent, an educated informed consent. So the ethical approval also applies to, especially you can see the educated prior informed consent. That's very important. what's also important is the acknowledgement and due credit. And I'll come back to that. Or maybe I should just explain it now. People say that rural participants in an ethnobotanical study should remain anonymous. Their name should not be revealed. I question that. I consider that to be a Eurocentric, old-fashioned way of doing science. Because if you consider that when we write a paper, when we write a scientific paper, and we get some verbal information from another expert, we cannot just use that information. We have to acknowledge the person who gave it to us in the form of a personal communication. So we say, Smith, 2020, perscom. So I'm asking myself the question, if that is the correct protocol, why do people not acknowledge the contributions of rural participants? I think it is unethical. And in our work since 2008, when we published the first papers, we have always linked each and every use record, each and every little bit of information we have linked to a person, to that person's birth date, so that future generations can look back and say, my grandfather or my great-grandfather contributed to this study. There it is in black and white. I think that is a practice that will gradually become more prevalent, and people will realize that to keep our informants, not to acknowledge the contributions of participants is not ethically correct. Most studies I see, they just say under acknowledgements, we thank the 35 participants in this study for their valuable contributions. In my opinion, that is unethical. That's not good enough. So when we work in rural areas, it's very important to observe local customs. So it is very difficult for, let's say, an English-speaking person to go into a paddy village and start doing ethnobotany. Therefore, hardly with any exception, all my students are studying their own cultures in their own home villages or their own rural areas. Here are two examples of Mahlatsi Mogale, who is a paddy person. And we obtain, the protocol is that we obtain permission from the chief. The chief needs to know what's going on in his village. And in the formal process, we get permission from the chief. The same happened with Sizwe Kawe's work in the Eastern Cape, where we got permission from the chief to work in the village. The second step is to collect all the information and literature. In this case, it's the Cape literature. That's my favorite topic. And I try to find as much as I can about the history of botanizing and exploration in the Cape region of South Africa. And then we do a reconnaissance trip to find people, participants, and to make contact with people. And then the fourth step, I've already mentioned it. We record all the species, we take photographs, we make a preliminary checklist of species, and we prepare the flip file. And I'll show you what the flip file looks like. So we have a page where we have composite photographs of the habit of the plant, what it looks like, if it's a tree or what. Sometimes the underground parts as well, if that is relevant, so that any participant who knows this plant will be able to recognize it. And then we use the flip file. It's numbered from 1 to 500, whatever, and we page through the flip file and discuss every plant. And this, of course, is especially valuable in an area where there is no, for example, rain, where you have a dry season. Then you cannot find any plants. You cannot find anything. And then we can still do our work. And so we ask only, for our quantification method, we only ask 3 questions. Do you know the plant? Do you have a name for the plant? And do you have a use for the plant? And then we enter it into a matrix. That is why we call it the matrix method, where we can calculate the popularity or how well a particular species is known. And we do this by just summing up the values. You can see 1, 2, 3. 1 means he knew the plant, 2 means he had a name for it, 3 means he had a use for it. So it adds up to 6. So if you add up all those numbers and divide it by the maximum possible numbers, you get the SPI value, the species popularity index. In the same way, and I think this is unique, I've never seen this in any other studies, where we actually also make a measure of the level of knowledge of the person by counting up the scores of each individual person in the same way. And we call this the ethnobotanical knowledge index. And this allows us to compare different villages and to compare certain studies over time to see if there's a loss of information or a gain. The advantages of this method, this quantification method, I think it's fairly obvious. The interview can be done any season or time of the year. And that's a big advantage, especially in the desert where the flowers only come out in spring. There's no need for walking or for searching for plants. And this is especially useful when many of the old people, they can no longer walk even. They have a lot of information. Typically, the old people have lots of information, but they are no longer mobile. So we can sit in the comfort of a house and we can do the work there. All species are covered. It's systematic. It's not random, it's systematic. And the visual aids, the pictures that we have, help people to remember. If they look at the plant, they say, I remember, that is what my grandmother used or whatever. So it helps to jolt the memory. And then we have complete data in the end of high quality. I think we owe it to these to the cultures of South Africa to do a proper job, to record high quality data for posterity. Then we publish in the end, and we have here an example of some papers. The one on the top left is the one where we described for the first time the matrix method. And of course, the information eventually gets into the books. And we have a new initiative to develop regional books on the useful plants. And also we are developing community feedback books where we have bilingual books in English and in the local language, to distribute to schools and to libraries as part of the feedback process, and also to encourage people to become aware of the depth of knowledge that's still present in rural areas. And then the feedback step, I think it's very important. I emphasized it already. People want to know, they want to see you again, they want to know what we have found and so on. They want to know the results. And sometimes it generates great excitement if they see that their faces are in the publication and that they are acknowledged for their contributions. So we do this formally. In the background behind me on the left, you see a poster. And at the bottom, that's not visible, is the faces of all the people who have contributed to that particular study are given with their names and dates of birth to give full recognition for their contributions. What people also do not recognize often and consider is the fact that we are creating in this process of linking names to anecdotes or to use records, we are creating a legal starting point for the records. So in case there's any disputes about intellectual property rights, one can go back to this publication of, let's say, 2010 and say in 2010 we have recorded that Jan Baekjes gave us that information. So it gives a legal starting point. And so in conclusion, I'd like to just quickly summarize and say that we need to comply with international protocols and international legislation, and therefore ethnobotanical knowledge is important to fully comply with the aims and ambitions of those conventions. We need to engage and empower local communities to record their precious knowledge for future generations, and to make sure that the younger generation remains interested in the ways of the past. There's an aeroplane going overhead, so I'm just... Then the third aspect is encouraging sustainable use through education and active participation. And this can be done through these conferences and interactions with local communities and the feedback process. And then documenting high quality data for potential future socioeconomic development. We need to know the details. Is the plant safe? How is it used? How is it processed? All the details are important. Gaining knowledge about traditional uses, gaining knowledge about traditional taboos associated with sustainable harvesting, and then basically preserving precious knowledge about nature for future generations. So I hope that you have gained some insights into the way we do it in South Africa, and perhaps also the way that it should be done by everyone. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will ask the public if there are some questions. Tenemos preguntas. Please, Victor. Vamos a hacerlas en inglés primero para que comprenda y en español para traducirlas, ¿sí? Entonces, so we will do the questions in English so that you can follow them. But also we will translate them in Spanish for people here. Please,
First,
Victor.
thank you for your conference. And I realized you got more than 24 years of research in this topic. But also, it was very interesting to know that your work is also applying in the regulation, in the national regulations. In terms of that, there is a biological protection very clear now. The question is, it's also included in the process to protect the molecular information. Is possible people is also obtaining from your data, from your books, from your plants that you know, with all the information. For example, stomach aches or back pains. All of that should be used in terms for the pharmaceutical products. So that's the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood, but perhaps I can just ask, did you ask me if the molecular aspects of the plant should also be protected?
Yeah.
Yes, and of course, that is the whole idea of this legislation. As I explained, that in South Africa, we distinguished two phases. We distinguish between the discovery phase of, for example, chemical studies of plants. And then we have also a bioprospecting phase. And the two phases are different in the sense that if you are a scientist and your only ambition is to publish a paper on, let's say, new chemical compounds of a plant, then you do not have to have a permit. You do not have to go through the whole process of applying for a permit, etc. Obviously, to collect the plants, you need a permit, right? To make sure that you don't destroy nature and so on. So there's some permits required for collecting plants and even for transporting them across provincial boundaries and so on. But you don't need a permit for bioprospecting. As soon as your aim with your work is to make a product or to start selling things, then you need a permit, and then the requirements are very strict. And I think this is a sensible distinction, because many scientists, they don't care, they don't want to make money, they are curiosity driven, they want to publish a paper, they want to learn more about nature and about chemical variation and so on. for example, chemosystematics is still quite an active topic. So in South Africa, it's only when you aspire to make money out of a particular project, then you are obliged to follow the rules. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Ben. There is another question. Thank you for this question. I think it is very important to regulate also the uses of knowledge internationally and nationally also, to push governments to regulate this kind of things. There is another question. Please, Cecilia.
Hello, sorry for my English. I have some question. For example, in Isla de Juárez here in the Sierra Norte, we have a very serious problem because the new generation have lost the knowledge of traditional use. What do you recommend in this case, for example, for us, for research to do in this case? Because this area is very important in Mexico and in the world. It's very, very, very rich in endemisms and traditional use. What do you recommend for us?
Well, if the knowledge is lost, it's lost, right?
Yes.
And it can never be regained. But maybe you can consider putting more effort into trying to locate people with traditional knowledge. Very often, the knowledgeable people in a village or in a community are not the ones that play politics and that's in the forefront. They are usually hidden, well hidden somewhere. And very often I have discovered, for example, I go to Van Reinsdorp, let's say it's a town in South Africa, and I ask around and I say, oh goodness, all the knowledge is lost. Everyone I talk to, and then suddenly someone tells me, but listen, there's a guy staying there outside the village in his little house there. Maybe you should speak to him. And then I go there and then I see the most wonderful information. So maybe one must just make sure that the knowledge is not lost. And that's not an easy thing to do because you have to theoretically at least talk to everyone to make sure that you do not have individuals in the community that's still very knowledgeable. I think it's possible. Just like I became a professor because I'm interested in plants, right? And so you do have people in rural areas that are from a young age are particularly interested in plants and in biology, nature, whatever. And maybe you have a chance to still recover something if you can just discover the right people. I hope so. I hold my thumbs for you. But if it's lost, it's lost. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have other question. I have curiosity because you say that 60% of the species of cave are endemic. How many of these species are or have used traditional knowledge? Do you know this exactly, or?
Kalina, help me a little bit. Did I hear correctly?
Yes.
I couldn't hear well, but she's asked me if I have knowledge about the endemic species.
No.
The uses of endemic species.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes, it is that one.
Yes.
It's the uses of endemic species. No?
Yeah.
Yes.
The uses of endemic species.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that's very clear. We have such high levels of endemism in South Africa that practically, many of the endemic species are used. So if you look at South African flora in general, then I think the level of endemism is about 70%. In the Cape fynbos, it's about 60% or so. And you have many, even commercialized plants that are endemic to the Cape. Rooibos tea, for example, famous tea, endemic to the Cape. Honeybush tea, endemic to the Cape. Pugu, endemic to the Cape, and so on. So no, there are many endemic species that are linked to traditional knowledge and to traditional uses. But what you are asking raises an important question, and I'm going to follow up now. I think you are clever by asking this question because one can now compare. Is the percentage of endemic species lower or higher than the general species? Are more endemic species used than normal species or not? That comparison has not yet been made formally. I don't think there's a difference, but it'll be interesting to find out and make sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. I don't know if there's another question, but maybe, I don't know, there is some need to translate. We can continue in English without any problem.
Buenos días. En mi comunidad no tenemos como esa cultura de la conservación, ¿no? Etnobotánica. Entonces, mi pregunta sería, ¿cómo podríamos iniciar o inculcar esta parte, ¿no?
Cuéntale un poquito de tu comunidad.
La comunidad se llama Guelatado de Juárez, es acá abajo, aquí en la comunidad. Guelatado de Juárez. Así es. Sí, y bueno, sí existen pensamientos de pobladores, ¿no? Que sí tienen ese interés, sin embargo, no es masivo, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo podríamos despertar ese interés de conservar esta parte? Gracias.
No, gracias. So, Ben, there is a young guy here in the public who is from Guelatao. Guelatao is a town close to Ixtlan, and it is a place for Mexican people important, historically important, because it is the birthplace of one of the most famous presidents of Mexico, Benito Juárez, and it is very, very known, Guelatao, Oaxaca. And he's asking us, he's a little bit worried because in this place, he has the idea that people is not really knowing biodiversity, is not really, the knowledge, the ethnobotanical knowledge is very, very low. And he's asking how to do, which strategy we can do to improve the knowledge of people, the ethnobotanical knowledge of people in Guelatao. What do you think?
Yeah, you mean improve the recorded, the records of knowledge, or improve the local people's knowledge about nature? Because there's two different things. You can record the knowledge, to try to record everything, and try to find people with a lot of knowledge to summarize it and to record it. You can also try to inspire the people to become more aware of how important and how precious such information is. And so that can be done through schools, for example. So that children ask the grandmother, please, grandmother, tell us how you use this plant and that plant. So that you generate a general interest and a general enthusiasm for traditional knowledge. I don't know if it's the same in Mexico, but in South Africa, rural people often feel that their knowledge about plants is not important. It's just, it's too simple to consider. It's not of interest to anyone else. And it takes a scientist or an enthusiast to point out to them how important that information is, and that it is worthwhile to keep it and to look after it and to record it for posterity. So maybe that is one approach. So I'm also involved with another academic. He's an educator. He's now at the University of Western Cape. And we have a project where we teach the teachers on how to incorporate indigenous knowledge into the school curriculum, and to inspire school children to become aware of traditional knowledge, and to develop. And amongst those, you will probably find future professors and future academics who has a natural interest in plants and in knowledge about plants. So I think the education aspect is really very important. So I think it's a matter of communicating with local people and trying to find still find people with knowledge. It's often the older people that has the knowledge. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Yes, I will ask. Bueno, él plantea que hay dos situaciones posibles, ¿no? Una donde realmente no hay ningún conocimiento, pero eso en realidad él considera que no es muy posible, que seguramente hay gente que tiene conocimiento. Entonces, si es así, la idea es comunicarse con esa gente y tratar de que ellos compartan el conocimiento con las nuevas generaciones a través de pláticas, escuelas, de reconocer a la gente que conoce, ¿no? Que tiene ese conocimiento etnobotánico, reconocerla, ¿sí? Y tratar pues, primero que lo comente, que lo comunique con las nuevas generaciones, pero también tratar de generar publicaciones, libros, ¿no? Se quede el conocimiento, que el conocimiento vaya también pues siendo documentado, ¿no? Eso es la propuesta, la estrategia que te propone. Él no considera que realmente, igual que le contestó a la doctora, que no es una pérdida total. Seguramente hay gente que tiene conocimiento no botánico, entonces esa gente hay que precisamente buscarla, ¿no? Tratar de aprovechar ese conocimiento y que sea capaz de transmitirlo a las nuevas generaciones, ¿no? Gracias por tu pregunta. Víctor, había otra pregunta.
Kalina, may I
Yes.
ask a question,
Yes.
please?
Yes, where are you? Who are you?
I'm in South Carolina.
Robbie.
Yes, how are you doing?
Hello, Robbie. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. But I have a statement to make to the gentleman, please. And I appreciate your project and all. And I want to say one of the things I work with about a half a dozen of the first peoples of Mesoamerica, and I'll be talking about an education project here in a few minutes. But what I want to tell you is that one of the ways I like to talk about these other ecological knowledge systems is that, where Europeans, they only have a few hundred years of what we really call peer review, whereas our indigenous sisters and brothers have 1,000 generations of peer review, teaching them everything they need to know to operate properly in these ecosystems. And I just wanted to throw that out there at you and tell you that I really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Robbie. So Robbie will have a presentation of a book, the next, I think, at which hour is your presentation? 10:15?
10:15 is 10:15. Is it in this room or another?
I didn't get it. Excuse me.
Yeah, at 10:15 in just a few minutes.
Yes, exactly, in a few minutes.
Will it be here or do I need to go someplace else?
Yeah. So the problem is that we have a simultaneous another event, the symposium, and it will be not very easy to be everywhere. But
Okay, mil gracias por todos.
but it is very nice that you are here, because you heard already Ben is also working for this knowledge, this ethnobotanical knowledge, and also you with your book and with your projects. Thank you, Robbie. No sé si hay otra pregunta, otro comentario, por favor.
Sí, sobre el protocolo de Nagoya, dos preguntas derivadas. Uno, si el protocolo de Nagoya ha contribuido al avance de la etnobiología. Segunda, en la práctica, ¿qué?
Ben, there
Yes.
is a very, very interesting question here
Yes.
about the Nagoya Protocol.
Yeah.
The question is, if you think that the Nagoya Protocol was really it was
Improving the biology knowledge.
yeah, improving the biological or ethnobotanical knowledge. If there is really a link or a correlation between the protocol, the Nagoya Protocol, and the progress more than improvement, progress of ethnobotanical knowledge or knowledge about biodiversity in general more.
Yes. Kalina, I'm very skeptical about the Nagoya Protocol, because if the Nagoya Protocol is properly implemented, and why should it not be retroactively implemented, then Mexicans would probably be some amongst the richest people in the world. I think also if we can get a few cents per kilogram for coffee, then Ethiopia will look completely different to what it is looking at the moment. So in my opinion, it is a very good idea that people should be compensated for the use of their resources and so on. But there are quite a number of practical difficulties. For example, in Southern Africa, you have an exchange of information between cultures. You cannot link the use of a particular plant to a particular culture. Why? Because the intellectuals of the different cultures would take care to go to other cultures and to other regions and improve their knowledge. Just like we go on conferences, international conferences. So people in former times, rural people in former times, the intellectuals, the illiterate intellectuals of the past, made exchanges with other intellectuals in other cultures. And so the source of the information is not clear. So now there's a material transfer agreement between a particular group or a tribe, if you like, but the knowledge actually came from another one. In Africa, it's also problematic because many of our plants also occur in East Africa and in Southern Africa, in Namibia or in Botswana. And so while the regulations are applied in South Africa, bioprospectors may choose to get the information and their resources from another country. So I think in summary, it's a very good idea to compensate people for their resources or for their knowledge, but one should not create false expectations, for one. And I think in many cases, it's totally impractical to try to, link a particular group of people to a particular plant, because often it has to be artificial. You have to choose some community to benefit, but many communities actually use the plant. So it becomes a little bit unscientific, I would say. So I'm not sure if the Nagoya Protocol has actually promoted the recording of information. I think it may even have done damage, because people are hesitant. People are now do not feel free to share, because they think maybe my knowledge can be used to make money and so on. So then you start having secrecy, and if you want to kill science, you have to start dealing with secrets. Because why do we publish in science? We publish because we want to make it known to the world. It's one of the cornerstones of science, is being open and being honest and not being secretive. And now you are sort of encouraging people to keep secrets. So I always in my work tell people, please do not burden me with your secrets. I don't want your secret. I don't like your secret. If it's a secret, it's a secret. Then keep it for yourself. Don't even mention it. See? Yeah, so, Dan Moorman, who was the president, he was the editor of Economic Botany in South Africa at our conference. He said, secrecy sucks. That's now an American expression to say secrecy sucks. In science, we don't deal with secrets. No, never. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So Mario, do you want to discuss a little bit about? Okay. So it was another question, but it is related to this one you were already answering. ¿Alguna otra pregunta, comentario con respecto al conocimiento etnobotánico, a lo que estuvo platicando el doctor, a sus propias comunidades? So I only to tell you, we are actually in Oaxaca, and Oaxaca, it is really a mix between high biodiversity and also high diversity, cultural diversity. There is a region in Mexico where you can find really both very high level. So, and it is really interesting to see how people is, I think the knowledge, the botanical knowledge in Oaxaca is surely also very high. And so maybe we have to do something here, Ben, to work here also with the communities, to use your indexes of knowledge, know the knowledge of people. Like, okay,
Yeah.
if there is, excuse me, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's the systematic way in which we record data that is more valuable. It's not so much the index, but the way in which we prepare this flip file, and where we make sure that we cover all the plants of a particular region. That's a lot of work to do, and I think that's why people would shy away from it. But I think, you know, Kalina, to me, indigenous knowledge is like a beautiful flower. You put it in a pot in your house, it's just indigenous knowledge. Is that we appreciate it so much because we know that we have already lost a large part of it, probably, and that we will probably still lose a lot of it. And that we try desperately to keep the flower alive by recording information about the flower. That's how I feel about it.
It's romantic. Nice, nice, Ben. So in Zoom or in other in the virtual in the net, so we have some. No, okay. Excuse me. No, there are no more questions.
Next week, Kalina. Next week.
Yeah. Next week, yes. Yeah.
Next week.
It's true. Yeah, next week.
Great.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Right.
See
So
you.
I can leave now, right, Kalina?
Yeah. You
Right.
can leave now. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Have a
Goodbye,
nice day.
everyone.
Bye.